Hello, it's a pleasure to see you again at Science and Sleep. Tonight, we will embark on a special journey together, exploring the mystery of memory and forgetting, why some things fade away like a fleeting dream, while other memories cling tightly to our minds like an old, familiar scent. Stay with me until the end of the video to discover fascinating answers and gain useful knowledge for yourself. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell because many more wonderful discoveries are waiting for you ahead. When it comes to memory, most of us often think of the ability to remember as a wonderful gift of the brain. But what few realize is that it is forgetting itself that creates the miraculous balance of life. If every experience, every sound, every fragment of memory were preserved, our minds would quickly become a chaotic, heavy, and uncontrollable storage. Forgetting, therefore, is not a failure, but an essential function, a subtle art that the brain has evolved over millions of years to ensure survival. Imagine this. Every day, the brain has to process millions of units of information, from the light streaming through the window, the sound of a passing car, to the feeling of cold wind on the skin. If all of these were stored permanently, you would not be able to distinguish what is important from what is fleeting. Forgetting here acts as a silent gatekeeper, eliminating the clutter and making room for more meaningful memories. A hug, a lesson, a story of a lifetime. Neuroscientists call this the selectivity of memory. Instead of keeping a perfect copy of the past, your brain only preserves the main outlines, like a simple sketch that is still enough to evoke emotions and meaning. This has a profound biological reason. Neural energy is finite, and in order to survive, the brain must prioritize. It is precisely this prioritization that makes experiences tied to strong emotions, joy, pain, fear, last longer, while trivial details gradually fade with time. A very ordinary example. You may not remember exactly what you had for lunch 3 weeks ago, but you clearly remember every moment of a special dinner with loved ones, where laughter and happiness imprinted themselves on your mind. The brain does not accidentally forget the everyday meal. It actively clears it out so that there is room for what truly shapes identity and the story of life. This mechanism is based on a phenomenon called synaptic plasticity. When a group of neurons fire together repeatedly, they strengthen their connections, creating a powerful pathway in the brain. But if not used, that path gradually becomes overgrown and disappears. This is how the brain manages memory, preserving the roads most traveled while erasing the useless shortcuts. In fact, this is a form of neural pruning, helping optimize the system and keeping the mind flexible. But forgetting is not merely erasure, it is also a creative act. Each time you recall something, the brain does not retrieve an intact photograph from storage. Instead, it redraws the memory from existing fragments. That is why memory can change over time, with added or missing details tinted by your current mood or imagination. Strange, isn't it? The memory you believe to be absolutely true may sometimes only be a version that has been edited many times. Yet, thanks to this, the brain can adapt, learn, and even transform old experiences into material for creativity. This truth has long troubled philosophers, from Plato to Hume. They sought to answer the question, is forgetting a flaw in the system or part of nature's perfect design? Today, neuroscience has offered a more convincing answer. We need to forget in order to truly live. Forgetting prevents the brain from overload while allowing it to focus on present goals, relationships, and values. Just think, if you remembered every failure, every mistake, every embarrassing moment you ever experienced, what would happen to you? Perhaps you would not dare to move forward. But thanks to forgetting, mental scars gradually fade, giving you the chance to renew, to forgive, and to live a better version of yourself. In a way, forgetting is a hidden gift, a healing medicine the brain has given you, even if you are unaware of it. Interestingly, this process is not always perfect. Sometimes, the brain forgets what you want to remember while holding on to what you want to forget. These imperfections remind us that memory is not a cold, mechanical hard drive, but a living system full of humanity. And it is precisely this imperfection that gives life its poetry. That every memory is not just data, but a story woven from emotions, choices, and the gaps of forgetting. So when you accidentally forget a small detail, don't blame yourself. See it instead as a sign that your brain is doing its job diligently, silently, and wisely. And don't be surprised if what remains in your memory is not entirely accurate, because memory, after all, is not a mirror reflecting the past, but a painting continuously being redrawn in the present. If memory is seen as a book being written, then forgetting is the blank space between the lines, the pause needed for the story to become coherent. But what makes memory even more miraculous is its ability to reflect not only the external world, but also the inner world of each person. Memory is not simply what we can remember, but also how we choose to remember. And from there, it shapes identity, emotions, and even the way we walk through life. One of the key discoveries of modern neuroscience is this: memory is tied to emotion. Like a stained glass window, emotion changes the tone of memory. A rainy day may be just an ordinary chain of events, but if accompanied by the sadness of parting or the joy of reunion, it will be etched into the mind with its own hue. The amygdala, the small almond shaped region next to the hippocampus, is the mysterious artist behind that stained glass. It not only sounds the alarm when we are afraid, but also whispers to the hippocampus, "This moment is important. Keep it well." Thanks to this, humans do not only remember the event, but also the feeling attached to it. When you recall childhood, you may not remember the exact details of the room or the clothes you wore, but you still clearly remember the aroma of your mother's soup, the cicadas buzzing on a summer noon, or the warmth of holding your father's hand on the village path. Memory, after all, is not a film replayed intact, but a symphony of senses and emotions. This also explains why we often remember dramatic events more than ordinary days. The brain must save resources, so it prioritizes preserving what can guide behavior or ensure survival. In prehistoric times, remembering the roar of a predator or the location of a clean water source was a condition for survival. Today, that mechanism still operates. We remember a painful fall in order to be more careful, or a moment of happiness to fuel us for the long journey ahead. However, memory is never static. Each time you recall, you are not only opening an old book, but also writing a new passage on that same page. The phenomenon of reconsolidation shows that memory can be modified, sometimes unintentionally, by the present context and experience. That is why your memory of the same event can change over the years, like a painting overlaid with many layers of color. Sometimes the new layer dulls the original details, but other times it makes the painting more vivid. And that is where memory becomes the art of life. We do not only remember, we recreate memory. The stories you tell about the past are not the original truth, but versions reconstructed to fit the present, to fit the person you have become. This may make some feel disoriented. Does memory betray us? But looking more broadly, this is evidence that memory is not a mechanical copy, but a part of the process of growth. It is thanks to this transformation that we have the ability to heal. A traumatic memory can gradually become less heavy when we connect it with new experiences, new perspectives. A failure that once brought us down can, with time, be recalled as a valuable lesson. Forgetting in this sense is not necessarily erasing, but softening the sharp edges of the past so it no longer cuts into the present. In this context, sleep plays the role of a silent carpenter. When you fall asleep, the brain does not fully rest. It still works diligently to sort, consolidate, and restructure information. What you learn during the day can become more enduring after a good night's sleep. On the contrary, lack of sleep is like a memory city that has not cleared its waste. Fragmented details get mixed up, pathways become chaotic. Sleep, therefore, is not only recharging energy, but also a secret ritual of remembering and forgetting. But if memory is a bustling city, forgetting is like urban planning. Not every road needs to exist forever. The little used paths will be covered with grass, making way for newer, more necessary avenues. This pruning biologically is the elimination of weak neural connections, making the system leaner and more efficient. And spiritually, it is the way humans keep from being burdened by the past so they can move forward. So then, what does memory truly serve? Perhaps the answer lies in this. Memory is not to hold on to the past, but to guide the future. You remember someone's face, not just to reminisce, but to recognize them in the next meeting. You remember a road not just to recall it, but to avoid getting lost when you return. Even the deepest memories, such as a first love or a great loss, shape the way you love and face other losses in the future. Memory, in that sense, is not just data, but a compass. And forgetting, seemingly its opposite, is the indispensable part that keeps the needle pointing in the right direction. If everything existed forever, you would be trapped. Thanks to forgetting, you learn to choose, to know what to keep, what to let go. Perhaps that is also the secret that makes humans different from machines. A machine can store all data, but it does not know how to forget. It does not know how to erase in order to keep living. But we, thanks to the ability to forget, can truly evolve with time. When speaking about memory and forgetting, we often tend to see things in a simple way. Remembering is good, forgetting is bad. But the truth is much more subtle. The human brain is not an infinite storage cabinet of information, but rather like a dedicated editor. It selects, refines, trims away trivial details, leaving us with a picture clear enough to live, to learn, and to grow. It is precisely in that process of forgetting that we find balance between the present and the past. Imagine that each day you live is like a torrential downpour of data. Car horns, lights, fleeting conversations, unfamiliar faces you meet in the elevator, all pouring into the mind. If the brain preserved everything intact, you would quickly be exhausted. Thus, forgetting the green shirt of a passerby or the sound of a neighbor's door slamming is not a system error, but a survival strategy. Only by knowing how to forget can you truly remember what is important. One of the sophisticated mechanisms behind this strategy is called synaptic pruning. As a child, the brain generates countless neural connections, far more than you need. They are like a dense, tangled forest, full of potential but also chaotic. As you grow, the brain begins to prune the branches, eliminating rarely used connections while preserving and strengthening the most important ones. This is why you forget how to read a children's book in an ancient mother tongue, but firmly remember how to ride a bike or the language you use every day. However, pruning is not memory's only weapon. Scientists Scientists have discovered that even in adulthood, the brain is capable of generating new neurons, especially in the hippocampus, the memory hub. This is both good news and a paradox. When new neurons integrate into old networks, they sometimes cause disruption. It is like renovating a room. When you add new furniture, you may have to move or discard the old. Perhaps this renewal contributes to forgetting, but at the same time opens opportunities for adaptation and learning. In addition, there is an old but powerful mechanism, the decay of memory over time. Time. If information is not recalled, it fades, like a path covered by weeds when few people walk it. This is not a malfunction, but the brain's way of conserving energy. Constantly reviewing, rehearsing, or linking new information with meaningful experiences is the way to keep that path clear. What is fascinating is that forgetting does not only occur when awake. As you sink into sleep, the brain embarks on a secret cleanup. Glial cells, especially microglia, act like a cleaning crew, removing old synapses and sweeping away neural waste. At the same time, the glymphatic system is activated, like an underground stream washing away toxins and molecules associated with neurodegenerative diseases. In the very moment you are dreaming, the brain is both consolidating necessary memories and gently erasing the small details that no longer matter. So, is all forgetting automatic? Not necessarily. Experiments show that humans have the ability to deliberately forget. When asked to not remember a word or an image, activity in memory-related regions actually decreases. In other words, the brain can put up barriers to keep memories from resurfacing. This may sound strange, but it is an important mechanism that helps us cope with trauma and move forward. Letting go of a painful memory is not only a psychological reflex, but also a biological decision. However, forgetting is not always gentle. Sometimes memories are obscured by interference. New information too similar to old information that can intrude and make retrieval difficult. You still remember, but it is as if the bookshelf of memory has too many overlapping books. You want the old one, but your hand keeps reaching the newer one. This is why you may confuse two acquaintances' names or forget an old password right after creating a new one. Here, we cannot fail to mention Hermann Ebbinghaus, who devoted his youth to turning his own memory into a laboratory. He patiently memorized hundreds of meaningless lists just to measure the rate of forgetting. The result was his famous curve, the forgetting curve, showing that we lose information very quickly right after learning. Then the rate of forgetting gradually slows. But from this, he also revealed a secret. Each timely review extends memory further, making it stronger. This is the foundation of spaced repetition, a learning strategy that anyone today can apply. Ultimately, forgetting is not memory's enemy. It is a silent companion, helping us to select, preserve, and clarify what matters most. Without forgetting, memory would turn into chaos. Without forgetting, we would be drowned in useless detail. Just as music needs pauses for the melody to soar, memory needs forgetting so that what truly matters can shine. Let's pause for a moment and think about this. Our memory is like a flashlight in the dark. It cannot illuminate every corner at once, but only focuses on a narrow area right in front of us. That is attention, the first gateway that determines what can enter memory. If you've ever walked into a room, then stood still for a few seconds, unable to remember why you went there, it's not necessarily because you were forgetful, but because your attention drifted away at a crucial moment. The information wasn't lit up by the flashlight, so it couldn't be imprinted in memory. This reveals an important truth. Memory is not a camera that records every detail neutrally, but a system of selection and organization. The brain constantly evaluates which data is worth keeping and which details should be let go. That's why when we forget the name of someone we just met or mix up an appointment during the week, it's not a personal flaw, but the brain's natural optimization strategy. It prevents you from being overwhelmed by mountains of trivial information. Scientists call this process the attention filtering mechanism. Imagine the brain as an email inbox. If every email were marked important, the inbox would quickly overflow and become chaotic. But if there's a sophisticated filter that prioritizes emails from your boss, loved ones, or projects you're working on, everything becomes more manageable. Our brain does the same thing with memory. However, there is an interesting paradox. Sometimes the very things we want to remember are the ones that slip away most easily. That's when memory is interfered with. If you've ever learned a new password and then unconsciously typed in the old one, you've experienced proactive interference, old memory interrupting and overriding the new. Conversely, if you forget the old password after using the new one for a while, that's retroactive interference, the new memory overshadowing the old. These two mechanisms are not rare, but proof that the brain is always updating, like software that is constantly patched and upgraded. This brings us to a golden principle. To remember for the long term, you must create distinctiveness and personal connection. The brain doesn't like monotonous repetition. A long list of meaningless words will quickly vanish, but if you link them with emotions, stories, or personal experiences, they will take root more deeply. This is why we can easily remember a joke told at a cafe, but struggle to recall a dry definition in a book. Let's apply this to language learning. If you only study vocabulary by reading a list over and over, your brain will treat it as noise and quickly discard it. But if you use that word in a funny story, tie it to a vivid image, or place it in a real conversation, the memory will grow stronger. Modern language learning apps have taken advantage of this principle. They combine spaced repetition with scenarios that are visual and emotional to defeat the forgetting curve. Yet, it's not only in studying that memory requires finesse. Everyday life works the same way. Remembering someone's name, commemorating an important occasion, or holding on to a moving moment all depend on how you label the experience. If you let an event pass without pausing to reflect, to connect, it will easily slip away. On the other hand, a moment that is carefully thought about, retold, and shared with someone will become a much more lasting memory. One could say memory is not just a storage box, but a continuous flow of meaning. It keeps what helps you survive, grow, and build identity. That's why forgetting also has a human value. It allows you to let go of old sorrows, unnecessary trivial details, and make room for what matters more in the present. The wonderful thing is that you can actively train the art of memory. By engaging multiple senses while learning, listening, looking, writing, by interleaving knowledge instead of cramming one subject, by creating emotional anchors tied to information, You not only remember longer, but also understand more deeply. And remember, sleep is memory's greatest ally. While you rest, the brain silently strengthens connections, reorganizes data, and transforms fragile information into lasting memory. So next time you forget a small detail, don't blame yourself. See it as a sign that your brain is doing its job, filtering, prioritizing, and keeping you focused on what truly matters. Memory is not a static box, but a living garden. And like any garden, it needs to be cared for with attention, connection, and the pauses that allow it to recover. The astonishing thing is that when we understand memory more deeply, we realize that forgetting is actually a silent friend. It is not a flaw, but a sophisticated strategy that the brain has developed over millions of years of evolution. If we remembered everything, we would fall into a state of cognitive paralysis, like a computer storing every junk file without ever cleaning them up. It is precisely the ability to forget that allows us to see the big picture and focus on what truly matters for survival and growth. Modern neuroscientists have proven that forgetting is not simply the loss of memory, but a deliberate process. The brain constantly scans and removes connections that are no longer valuable. It is like a gardener pruning dead branches so the tree can grow greener and stronger. Thanks to this, we do not get stuck in trivial details, but instead retain patterns, lessons, and core meanings. In learning, this phenomenon becomes an invaluable tool. You may have experienced this feeling, reading a chapter of a book and forgetting most of the content after a few days. At first glance, it seems disappointing. But strangely enough, if you go back to review, memory becomes more lasting. This phenomenon is called the spacing effect. In fact, temporary forgetting creates a gap, so that when you recall, the brain must work harder, pulling information from the subconscious into the light. This very effort strengthens neural connections, turning fragile memory into solid knowledge. This means that forgetting is not the enemy of learning, but rather a part of the learning process itself. Thanks to forgetting, we have the opportunity to train memory. Just as muscles only grow stronger through strain and recovery, memories also become more durable through the alternating rhythm of forgetting and remembering. If we never forgot, we would never learn how to engrave knowledge deeply. Forgetting is also a psychological defense mechanism. Imagine if every pain, every emotional wound, every shame or failure were etched as vividly as on the first day, we would live in endless torment. But fortunately, the brain has a way of softening the edges of memory over time. Sharp details gradually dissolve, leaving only the general sense, I overcame it, I learned something. Thanks to this, humans can let go of the past, rebuild the present, and continue moving toward the future. In psychotherapy, this phenomenon becomes foundational. People with trauma often recall painful scenes as if they are happening in the present. The purpose of therapy is not to erase memory, but to help them build emotional distance, so the brain gradually re-encodes the experience in a less harmful form. In a natural way, this is also what time and forgetting are doing for all of us. Remarkably, memory is not a neutral tape recorder. It is reconstructive, continuously rewritten each time we recall it. When recounting a memory, you are not just retrieving old information, but unconsciously editing, omitting, and adding present emotions. This sometimes makes memory inaccurate, but it is also a blessing. It allows us to rewrite our life stories in more comforting ways. A wound can be reimagined as a lesson. A failure can become motivation. Forgetting, in this case, is the miracle of reconstruction. This also explains why we usually only remember what is striking. An ordinary workday, buses, crowds, traffic lights, slips away from the mind. But if that day held a surprising moment, like a stranger's smile or a sudden rain sweeping away golden leaves, that memory may last forever. The brain chooses to keep the highlight scenes, not the whole movie. This is how it saves energy and preserves clarity. Here, we learn something interesting. If you want to remember something for a long time, make it stand out. By associating information with emotion, surprise, or creativity, you send a strong signal to the brain. This is important. Keep it. This is why lessons tied to stories, images, and experiences take root far more deeply than dry pieces of information. Once again, this proves that memory is not defective. It was never meant to record every detail, but to help us adapt. Therefore, forgetting is essential. It clears the clutter, preserves the essence, and helps us keep living without being crushed by the past. More accurately, forgetting is a perfect expression of memory functioning properly. So, when you put your keys somewhere and forget them, or when a person's name slips away just after meeting them, don't worry too much. That is not a sign of memory loss, but simply your brain prioritizing energy for more important tasks. That little forgetfulness is the price you pay to be able to focus, create, and continue learning every day. In fact, if we think positively, we might say that forgetting is the art of living. It teaches us to let go, to forgive, to make room in our minds for new things. If we remembered everything, perhaps we would never dare to try again after failure, never dare to open our hearts after a wound. By forgetting, humans can love again, start again, and smile again. Perhaps we are used to thinking of memory as a storage room where everything is kept on endless shelves. But the truth is, the brain is not a vast warehouse. It is more like a careful editor, deciding each day which words to keep and which details to erase so that the story becomes neat and easy to read. And sometimes that act of erasure is not a loss, but a wise choice. This is the concept of active forgetting, a process in which the brain does not merely let memories fade, but actually participates in letting them go. This may sound strange. We often believe that a perfect memory is something to aspire to. But imagine if you remembered every face that passed you on the street, every advertisement, every line of text you had ever read, would your mind still have room to think, to create, and to dream? In fact, this selective process is what allows you to survive and thrive. The brain does not record everything like a video camera. It is more like a collage artist, leaving out many fragments so that the final picture has meaning. Recent studies show that the mechanism of active forgetting works thanks to special neural circuits. Instead of strengthening all the connections between neurons, the brain sometimes weakens them, like pruning excess branches on a bonsai tree. This process is especially powerful during sleep, when the brain not only consolidates important memories, but also quietly clears away confusing, unnecessary details. The next morning, you wake up not only rested, but also lighter, your mind ready for a new day. So, why does this matter? Because memory is not just data, it is tied to emotion. Some memories carry pain, shame, or trauma. If the brain forced you to hold on to them all, you would soon be exhausted. When we experience psychological trauma, the amygdala often becomes overactive, causing painful emotions to cling tightly to memory. But the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain related to control and planning, sometimes turns down the volume of that memory, making it gradually fade. This is not weakness, but protection. It is the mind's way of telling you, keep moving forward. You don't need to carry that stormy sky forever. In everyday life, this mechanism is more evident than we realize. You forget the name of someone you briefly met, but you remember the feeling of safety when you were with a close friend. You forget what you ate 3 days ago, but you vividly recall the moment you first received an important compliment. The brain sifts and prioritizes as if it knows not everything deserves to be kept. Forgetting can even be fertile ground for creativity. Unique ideas often do not arise from perfect recall, but from mistakes, mismatched combinations, or filling in gaps with imagination. A musician might forget the original melody and accidentally create a new harmony. A scientist might forget a detail from an old experiment and then form a bolder hypothesis. In this way, forgetting is not only erasing but also recreating. But the most fascinating part is this: forgetting is not always passive. People can learn to forget. In psychological studies, when participants were asked to deliberately ignore a piece of information, their ability to recall it actually diminished. This suggests we can train the brain, teaching it to let go of things that no longer serve us. For example, instead of replaying a sad memory over and over, you can consciously shift your focus to another activity, gradually weakening the neural connections that hold that memory. Picture the brain as a garden. If you only plant but never prune, eventually the trees will crowd each other, light will not filter through, and the soil will become suffocating. Active forgetting is that act of pruning, letting the garden breathe, allowing the healthiest plants to thrive. And just like a garden, pruning does not mean destroying. The roots remain, nourishing new life, but they no longer dominate the present space. From another perspective, forgetting can also be an act of humanity. When we forgive someone, it is often thanks to the ability to forget part of their mistake, not to erase it completely, but to make that memory less sharp, less thorny. It is this very forgetting that paves the way for healing. Imagine if every error were carved deeply forever. Would there still be room for forgiveness? Of course, the brain is not perfect. Sometimes it forgets the password you need immediately, but remembers vividly a memory you wish you had left behind. Yet, in the big picture, this mechanism operates with remarkable precision. Most of what is erased is in fact unimportant, or the erasure itself is precisely what allows you to move forward. When you understand this, you may feel lighter each time you realize you have forgotten something. It is not a mistake, but an unconscious choice by the brain, an act of trimming and editing, so you can focus on what truly shapes who you are today. Memory, after all, is not a museum to display everything. It is a diary still being written, and the remaining blank pages need space to be filled. When we look back on the journey of memory, what surprises many people the most is its strange flexibility. Memory does not operate like a camera recording every moment, but rather like a painter, always adding, removing, and sometimes even imagining details that never existed. Scientists call this the reconstructive nature of memory. Each time you recall an event, the brain is not opening an old tape, but is actually reconstructing the story from many fragments, images, sounds, emotions, and even speculation. That is why two people witnessing the same event may remember it differently, not because one is lying, but because their memories have been reprogrammed in their own way. Even more interesting, this reconstructive process is not a flaw, but an evolutionary advantage. It helps us avoid being haunted by absolute accuracy while flexibly drawing meaning from experience. For example, you may not remember every single word in a conversation with a loved one, but you still retain the general impression: warmth, affection, or sadness. The brain prioritizes this because emotions and the overall message are more important than trivial details. However, that very flexibility also makes memory vulnerable. Strong memories can gradually be altered over time. A sad story may become sharper the more you retell it, like a scar etched deeper. Conversely, a sweet moment may fade if you don't recall it often. Research has shown that memory is not only eroded by time, but also influenced by the present context. If today you are happy, when recalling a past event, you may find it lighter. But if you are hurt, that very memory can become a new wound, more painful than when it first occurred. One of the strangest things is how the brain links memory with the sense of time. Childhood memories often seem endless because that was a stage when we constantly experienced new things: distant trips, the first day of school, the first time falling in love, unpredictable adventures. The brain at that time constantly marked many new milestones, making that period feel vast and immense when we look back. In contrast, in adulthood, most days pass in the repetition of routines. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays blur together like blank pages. Time seems shortened because the brain does not record many new milestones. That is why we often feel the older we get, the faster time flies. This phenomenon is sometimes called the illusion of time distance. It does not reflect physical time, but psychological time. Our minds measure life through memories, not calendars. When we live through rich experiences, the brain fills up with many imprints, and we feel that period of time was long. But when life becomes monotonous, we look back and realize the whole year passed in the blink of an eye. This suggests an important message. If we want to expand our perception of time, we need to create new experiences. A trip to a strange land, learning a new skill, a new friendship, all of these help the brain add more milestones. They not only enrich memory, but also make us feel life has been extended in a spiritual sense. But memory is not only personal, it is also the thread that connects people. A story you remember and share may touch someone else, making them realize they are not alone. Many studies on psychotherapy show that sharing painful memories in a safe space can help release emotional burdens. Private memory becomes collective memory, and in that process, pain gradually turns into empathy. This is a powerful healing mechanism. Memory connects people instead of isolating them. However, memory is not always easily tamed. Experiences that are too heavy, too haunting, can turn into traumatic memory. Unlike ordinary memory, they intrude unexpectedly, causing nightmares, vivid flashbacks as if the event is happening again. They make the traumatized person feel trapped in the past, unable to escape. But modern neuroscience brings a ray of hope. Memories, no matter how powerful, can still be reshaped. Through therapies such as memory reconsolidation, specialists can help patients recall events in a safe environment, then rewrite the emotional response attached. Over time, the memory still exists, but the pain lessens, like a scar that has healed. On a lighter level, each of us can also practice this in daily life. Whenever a painful memory arises, instead of trying to erase it, we can learn to observe it, acknowledge it, and gently place it in a new context. Think of retelling the same story, but from a different perspective. Instead of seeing only the pain, we may recognize what we have learned, what we have overcome. This approach does not change the memory, but changes its meaning in our life. Ultimately, memory, whether vivid or faint, joyful or painful, is the material that makes up identity. It not only preserves the past, but also shapes the future. It teaches us how to love, how to trust, how to fear, how to hope. And sometimes, simply by understanding that memory can always be renewed, we give ourselves a gift: freedom. Freedom is not about forgetting, but about learning to live with memory in a gentler way. Sleep, at first glance, may seem like an interruption, a blank space between moments of wakefulness, but in reality, it is the stage where billions of neurons perform silent plays. In the darkness behind closed eyes, the brain initiates a complex series of tasks: sorting memories, clearing out neural waste, balancing emotions, and even rehearsing future scenarios. It is within this quiet world that science reveals the secrets of how we remember, how we forget, and, more importantly, how we become ourselves. One of the most miraculous processes takes place during the REM stage, when your eyes dart rapidly beneath the lids and dreams spin stories sometimes so absurd they are hard to believe. But do not mistake them for just a free nightly movie. Neuroscience shows that REM is like an emotional laboratory where the brain replays past experiences, gradually lessening the weight of pain, blurring the sharp edges of memory. You might go to bed with a heavy heart, but often, by the next morning, that feeling has lightened, almost as if someone has adjusted the volume of your memories inside your mind. Imagine memory as unedited photographs. During the day, you constantly take thousands of shots: a face passing by in a cafe, a brief conversation with a colleague, an irritated glance in a meeting. All of these are stored in the brain's raw camera. But at night, when sleep takes over, REM is the post production editor. It selects the important frames, adjusts the colors, erases scratches, and stitches them into a more coherent story. Not every memory is preserved, most are cut away like excess film. And it is precisely thanks to this strictness that the brain can conserve energy, avoiding being drowned in an ocean of information. What is astonishing is that not only ordinary memories are processed in REM, but also emotional memories, the type that greatly shapes how we perceive life. Those who lose REM sleep often become easily stressed, struggle to control anger, and are prone to prolonged anxiety. Conversely, when you have a full night's sleep, the brain seems to grant you a free therapy session, softening the sharp edges of emotions so you can face the new day without collapsing under the weight of yesterday. But sleep is not only about healing, it also expands creativity. Have you ever woken up with a sudden idea, a solution to a seemingly impossible problem? It is no coincidence. While dreaming, the brain connects scattered fragments, testing out unusual combinations. Musician Paul McCartney once shared that the melody of Yesterday came to him in a dream. Chemist Dmitry Mendeleev also dreamed of the periodic table. This is not mystical, but rather the result of the brain temporarily loosening rigid logic, allowing ideas to meet freely. One could say REM is the bridge between old memories and new creativity. However, like any natural process, sleep has both light and dark sides. Nightmares are a prime example. They often appear when the mind struggles to process unresolved memories: a fear, a shock, a suppressed pressure. Though frightening, nightmares can sometimes be the brain's way of confronting truths we try to avoid. They place you in the harshest scenarios, forcing you to face them, test your reactions, and sometimes leave you with a clear lesson the next morning. In other words, even bad dreams carry a certain protective function. Modern neuroscience also shows that different stages of sleep handle different types of memory. Deep non-REM sleep often strengthens declarative memory, for example, the formula you just learned or the presentation you need to recall. Meanwhile, REM sleep emphasizes emotional and procedural memory, such as remembering how to play an instrument, how to drive, or encoding experiences that made you laugh or cry. Both stages work together like a double assembly line. The first lays the foundation, the second colors and refines it. Without one or the other, your memory would be either limping or dry or too fragile to endure. Looking at the bigger picture, this reminds us that sleep is not a luxury, but a biological necessity. We often sacrifice sleep to finish work, chase deadlines, or indulge in extra hours of entertainment. But the price is not just fatigue. It is weaker memory, unstable emotions, and stifled creativity. Sleep is like the brain's save file button. Without pressing it, all your daytime effort can vanish within hours. And finally, from a humanistic perspective, sleep is also a silent storyteller. Each night, it selects the most important fragments of yesterday, weaves them into the fabric of memory, and frames them into a larger story, the story of you. You do not just remember events, but remember in ways that reflect yourself. What makes you proud, what leaves you regretful, what you wish to carry forward on your journey. In that sense, sleep not only helps us survive, but also helps us understand who we are. Creativity, in some sense, can be seen as a form of special memory. It does not merely rely on the existing data stored in the brain, but also depends on the ability to let go. When we forget certain details, the brain suddenly opens up a space where fragmented memories can be reconnected in new ways. It is within that space that imagination finds freedom. You can think of it as an attic filled with old objects. If everything were kept intact, the attic would become cramped, leaving no room for anything new. But when some objects fade, when we clear away the excess, the room suddenly becomes a place where an entirely different creation can be arranged. Neuroscientists call this the mechanism of adaptive forgetting. The brain does not only store information, but also constantly selects, compresses, and in that process, inadvertently creates gaps. These gaps are not flaws, but necessary conditions for creativity to arise. It is precisely the imperfection of memory that allows us to imagine. For if we remembered everything with absolute detail, we would only repeat the past instead of recreating it. Imagine a musician sitting in front of the piano. He does not remember exactly every chord he played in the previous performance, but he still retains a feeling, a rhythm, a vague echo. From those fragments, he weaves a new melody. Or a writer, when recalling childhood, cannot remember every word, every color, but the glow of a sunset, the sound of pure laughter, or a fleeting sadness become the material. Precisely because certain details are blurred, the story has room to grow. In the psychology of creativity, this is called cognitive flexibility. It emerges when the brain allows faint memories to blend and freely combine with one another. Forgetting part of a memory does not diminish the value of experience, but sometimes even enhances creativity. Because instead of being bound by rigid precision, the mind can soar, adding in new strokes. In fact, neurological experiments show that when people forget small details of an event, they often create new, more unique interpretations. The brain is not just a storage warehouse, but a workshop where old memories are melted down and reassembled into ideas that have never existed before. Here, forgetting does not mean losing, just but restructuring. This also explains why great ideas often arise in a state of relaxation, when we are not trying too hard to remember, but allow the mind to wander freely. While walking under the trees, while dreaming, or even while washing dishes, the brain quietly retrieves faded memory fragments and silently weaves them together. That is implicit memory, the kind that does not need us to consciously summon it, but still quietly serves creativity. If memory is the raw material, then forgetting is the space for imagination to take flight. And on a deeper level, forgetting also carries a humanistic value. It helps us let go of obsessions, of pain, and from there, opens up a space to nurture new things. A painter cannot forever paint the devastated scene after a storm. He needs to forget part of the destruction to paint the sunrise of rebirth. A human being is the same. No one can create if their mind is weighed down by a past not yet released. Perhaps that is why, in many philosophical traditions, forgetting is not loss, but a kind of liberation. Greek philosophers once compared memory to a river, and forgetting to its bends, where the flow cuts away a part, but at the same time opens a new turn. Without those bends, the river would only flow straight, dry up, and lose its ability to sustain life. Interestingly, modern science agrees with this metaphor. Research on neuroplasticity shows that it is precisely change, the erasure of part of old connections, that allows the brain to build new networks. In every act of forgetting, the brain is not only losing, but also preparing for upcoming creativity, like a craftsman removing bricks to build a new structure. Therefore, instead of fearing when we forget a detail, a memory, we can learn to cherish it. Forgetting does not mean the memory disappears completely. It only recedes, making room for newer things to emerge, a creative idea, a human emotion, or a gentle beginning. And perhaps that is the silent gift of forgetting. It not only heals sorrow, but also nurtures creativity. It allows us to carry memories while still moving forward, so that from imperfect fragments we can weave a new story, one that is both tied to the past and reaching toward the future. When memory begins to falter, we truly realize how fragile and precious it is. Perhaps that is why illnesses like Alzheimer's or amnesia are not only medical challenges, but also deep reflections of human nature. Memory is not simply a storage vault, but the thread that stitches the scattered fragments of life into a continuous story. When that thread unravels, we feel ourselves gradually fading away. Alzheimer's is the clearest evidence of this. Patients gradually lose their ability to orient in the present, yet they hold on to distant memories. The sight of an elderly person sitting silently, their eyes clouded, but suddenly humming a childhood song with a radiant smile, it is both tragedy and miracle. Tragedy, because the present has blurred, miracle, because music, like a form of primal memory, still dwells deep within. This shows us that memory does not exist as a unified block, but is layered and dispersed, each layer holding a part of us. And even when one door closes, another may remain ajar. But Alzheimer's is not the only disorder that reveals the secrets of memory. Amnesia, often portrayed in film as a dramatic erasure of the past, is in reality far more diverse and intricate. Some people forget their entire past before an accident, retrograde amnesia. Others cannot retain any new information after a brain injury, anterograde amnesia. Each form of loss is not just a medical symptom, but raises philosophical questions. Who are we when we no longer remember who we are? Consider the famous case of patient HM, one of neurology's classics. After surgery removing his hippocampus to treat epilepsy, he could no longer form new long-term memories. Each conversation lasted only a few minutes in his mind before vanishing. Yet, astonishingly, HM could still learn new motor skills, even though he did not remember ever practicing. He became better at drawing shapes seen in a mirror, though every time he picked up the pencil, he believed it was his first attempt. This case shows that memory is not a single entity, but an ecosystem with many branches: declarative memory, procedural memory, emotional memory. One branch may collapse, while another persists resiliently. It is at this point that memory is both fragile and steadfast. It can shatter under trauma, yet still preserve enduring undercurrents. A melody, a scent, a familiar gesture can break through the rupture, resurfacing when we thought all was lost. Neuroscience calls this the fragmentation of the memory system, but from a humanistic view, we can see it as a reminder. Human identity is not only in the events we recall, but also in habits, emotions, and the silent connections with the world around us. From this perspective, forgetting is no longer just an enemy. It can be a teacher, showing us that memory is not meant to be preserved intact, but filtered, making room for continuity. And paradoxically, it is when faced with memory loss that we realize the value of both remembering and forgetting. Caregivers of Alzheimer's patients, for instance, often learn a new language, the language of patience, of living fully in the moment. They understand that what matters is not making the patient remember, but creating moments of peace in the present where memory is no longer a prerequisite for happiness. There are also cases where memory is not lost but distorted. Psychological trauma can warp memory, imprinting an event in hues quite different from reality. This reminds us that memory is not an objective recording device, but a storyteller. That storyteller sometimes embellishes, sometimes omits, sometimes conceals to shield us from pain. Thus, memory not only preserves the past, but rewrites it in ways that allow us to keep living. Perhaps it is this fragility that makes memory sacred. If it were immutable, it would be rigid like stone, leaving no space for healing or creativity. Thanks to forgetting, we can let go of pain. Thanks to fading memories, we can allow ourselves to write new chapters. And even when illness renders memory fragmented within each shard, we can still glimpse human light. A smile at the sound of a song, a tear when a beloved name suddenly resurfaces. Neuroscience today continues to unravel these mysteries, but at the same time brings us back to an old truth. Memory does not reside only in neurons, but also in relationships, in community. When one person forgets, another can remember for them. When a story fades in one mind, it still lives in collective memory. Through this, human identity never completely disappears. Thus, memory is both personal and communal, both fragile and steadfast. It may fracture in diseases like Alzheimer's, but it cannot be completely erased. For memory is also woven into music, into language, into the love we give each other. Perhaps that is the most enduring layer of memory, the one that does not need the hippocampus to exist, but needs the heart. When we think of memory, we often imagine it as a box that stores information. We put memories into it, then later open it to retrieve them. But the truth is much more subtle and complex. Memory is not a static warehouse, but a living system, always changing, constantly recording, editing, and even recreating details. That is why forgetting is not simply a loss, but sometimes a protective and optimizing mechanism of the brain. Imagine this: if our brain kept every bit of information, every license plate that passed by, every random smell of food on the street, every irrelevant whisper, the mind would quickly become an enormous garbage dump. Everyday absent mindedness, like forgetting where you put your glasses, is not a failure, but a strategy. The brain is prioritizing, discarding the meaningless to preserve what is more valuable. It is a sophisticated filtering system, not a flaw. Interestingly, the process of forgetting not only lightens our perception, but also nourishes creativity. When old connections fade, the mind becomes flexible, ready to link seemingly unrelated ideas. This is why many great inventions or unique ideas often emerge when the brain relaxes from rigid memory. By forgetting the familiar path, we can discover the unexpected turn that leads to creativity. But forgetting is not only a biological mechanism, it is also a spiritual gift. Do you remember the last time you went through a pain, a breakup, a hurtful word, or a failure that kept you awake at night? At first, that memory was so vivid and sharp, it almost pierced through you. Yet over time, those painful edges gradually softened. The event remains, but the emotional intensity fades, allowing you to move forward. That is the brain protecting you. If every emotional wound forever stayed raw, humans would hardly survive the ups and downs of life. Forgetting is also closely linked to learning. Each time you absorb something new, the brain must decide which old information to keep and which to trim away to make space for the new. Scientists call this process synaptic pruning, like a gardener cutting away dry branches so the tree can grow stronger. Without this clearing, new information would struggle to take root. In other words, forgetting is partly a condition for learning. Letting go becomes the foundation for growth. Another striking fact is that human memory does not operate like a camera or a tape recorder. It does not simply store and replay. Each time we recall an event, the brain is actually reconstructing that memory from scattered fragments. Thus, memory is not immutable. It is shaped by current emotions, new beliefs, and even the stories we tell ourselves. This is why two people experiencing the same moment may remember it very differently. And it is also why sometimes we fully believe in a memory that never actually happened the way we recall. This mechanism is both marvelous and unsettling. Marvelous because it allows us to recreate our life story in meaningful ways. Unsettling because it reminds us that memory is not absolute evidence, but a distorted mirror reflecting reality. Yet, this very distortion is what makes us human. It helps smooth harsh edges, preserve lessons while easing pain, or conversely, amplify joy to give us strength. On a deeper level, memory and forgetting also shape identity. When you tell your story, you are not merely listing data, but choosing specific memories to form a narrative. who I am, what I have experienced, and where I am going. In that story, what you remember is as important as what you forget. If you kept everything, the story would become meaningless chaos. Thanks to forgetting, you can select and weave a continuous thread that gives a sense of coherence and purpose. Forgetting can even be a skill we actively practice. When learning a new skill, we must forget old habits to replace them with more effective ones. When one door in life closes, we learn to let go in order to walk through another. Forgetting, in many cases, is not just a passive occurrence, but also a courageous choice. The choice to stop clinging to the past in order to free space for the future. This brings us to an intriguing paradox. A perfect memory does not necessarily bring a happy life. Those with the ability to remember every detail often find it more a burden than a gift. They cannot escape the ghosts of mistakes, pains, or trivial details that never fade. Meanwhile, our ability to forget, though sometimes troublesome, is the key to balance, creativity, and healing. So, next time you struggle to remember where you left your keys, smile. It is not proof of inadequacy, but a reminder of the brain's wonder. It is silently filtering, protecting, and nurturing you in ways you may not even notice. And it is thanks to forgetting, as much as to remembering, that we can live fully in each moment without being buried under the weight of all that has passed.